Well, we're reading our last chapter of Ribsy by Beverly Cleary. Did you know that Beverly Cleary, this author, is still alive? She is 104 years old. You've probably read some of her books, like Judy B. Jones. There's other books by Beverly Cleary that you know, Ramona and Isis. Here's the last chapter of Ribsy. Ribsy and the apartment house. Henry pressed the phone to his ear as hard as he could. He heard a lot of barking, and then he heard Joe yell. "What did you let him go for? There's a reward for him. 10 whole dollars." There was an answer in a girl's voice which Henry could not catch. The sound of thumping feet. And then nothing but the sound of the television set, tuned to a program with a lot of shooting, which his parents would not let him watch. "I don't get it," Henry said to his mother and father, who had been following his side of the conversation. "There was a lot of barking, and now there isn't anyone on the line. Anybody home?" he asked into the phone in a loud voice. There was no answer, only gunfire from the television set. "Hang on a minute and see what happens," said Mr. Huggins. "Now that we're this close to Ribsy, we can't let him get away." Henry strained to catch the sound that might come through the telephone. He heard barks that grew fainter, yelling, arguing, and finally, click, as somebody in the sailor's house replaced the telephone receiver. That click was as final as a period at the end of a sentence. Slowly, he replaced the receiver. At that time, there was phones you had to hang up, not like our cell phones now. He thought a moment and then said, "At least Ribsy recognized me. That's something." When Ribsy could run no more, he flopped down on the sidewalk in the dark to pant. As soon as he caught his breath, he got up again and started off at a brisk trot with his nose to the ground. The trouble was, he did not know where he was going. It was all very puzzling. He had heard Henry Huggins' voice, but he could not find Henry. He stopped and barked, thinking that Henry would call. When there was no answer, he continued his search, hoping his nose would guide him. The sidewalk gave Ribsy a sense of many people and of a variety of dogs and of cats or two. But he did not give up. That did not give him the scent of Henry. Ribsy became tired, confused, and bewildered. Late that night, he gave up looking for Henry and went to sleep on a cold concrete in front of the Coffee Cup Cafe, where the lingering smell of hamburgers fried during the day gave him some comfort. Early the next morning, Ribsy woke up feeling stiff and hungry. The Coffee Cup Cafe was not open, so he walked around to the back door, where he found a garbage can that smelled interesting. It must have smelled interesting to some other dogs too, because the can had been tipped over and the garbage was strewn or thrown all around the ground. Ribsy helped himself to some bits of bun, which were smeared with more relish than he cared for. He also ate the remains of a piece of pie. The best garbage had already been eaten, but at least his stomach was no longer completely empty. Ribsy wandered aimlessly around the neighborhood, which did not look like Click-Clack Street with its green lawns and white houses surrounded by shrubbery, bushes. There was very little grass in the neighborhood and not many bushes, although there were a number of fire hydrants. Many of the buildings came right to the sidewalk, and most of them were brick and were 3 or 4 stories high. Oh, those sound like apartments. There's no lawn. It was in front of one of these buildings that Ribsy first saw a boy with a tennis ball. Oh, I forgot to tell you, chapter 7 is called Ribsy and the Apartment House. He was a thin boy, somewhat rounded shoulders, who was sitting in the front step, tossing the ball from one hand to the other. Naturally, Ribsy was interested in a boy with a tennis ball. While Ribsy was watching the boy, a young woman came out of the apartment. She was wearing a black coat over a starched dress, and it means it's been ironed, and an apron of a waitress. "Now see here, Larry Biggerstaff," she said. "You keep out of trouble today. Do you hear?" "Yeah, Mom," said Larry, tossing the ball. Ribsy decided he did not like the smell of this woman. It reminded him of the violet bubble bath. I don't want to hear any more complaints from the manager about you, continued his mother. Last Saturday, Mrs. Screech complained that you played a mouth organ in the hall, bounced a ball so that it disturbed the lady downstairs, and tried to climb down the fire escape. Keep it up, and you'll get us evicted. And then where we go. Evicted means they'll get kicked out of their apartment. Larry heaved a big sigh to show that he was disgusted at the whole situation. But, Mom, there's nothing to do. I don't even have a good ball to take to the playground. I don't have money to buy a ball, said his mother. At noon, you can come to the cafe and get your lunch. And in the meantime, keep out of trouble. She left the apartment and hurried down the street toward the Coffee Cup Cafe. Larry began to bounce the tennis ball, which was old and had lost much of its life. He had to throw it down hard to make it bounce at all. Nevertheless, the sight of a ball was stimulating to Ribsy. He pranced right up to Larry, wagged his tail to show he was ready to play. Larry did not understand. Go away, you old dog, he said crossly, and muttered, I don't even have a good ball. This boy needed educating. Ribsy barked to tell him that there was a dog ready to play with a tennis ball. Larry backed away. Ribsy wagged his tail and looked eager, but this only made Larry cautious. Plainly, Ribsy would have to show this boy how to play. He bowed before Larry, ran off a little, and then came dashing back. Larry dropped the ball, and Ribsy picked it up. You give me back my ball, said Larry. Ribsy dropped the ball and stood over it, wagging his tail. Cautiously, Larry advanced toward the ball. But when he was about to pick it up, Ribsy grabbed it with his jaw and went racing up the street. Hey, said Larry. Ribsy raced back and dropped the ball at Larry's feet and stood waving his tail and looking hopeful for the boy to throw the ball. Well, thanks, pal, Larry said, surprised and pleased. Woof, said Ribsy. The boy finally understood. He threw the ball down the street and Ribsy bounded after it, darting between the people who were walking on the sidewalk and catching it on the first bounce. He was delighted, and so was Larry. The boy threw the ball again and again for Ribsy to retrieve. Finally, Larry sat down on the front steps of the apartment, and Ribsy threw himself down at his feet, panting. You're a pretty nice dog, remarked Larry. I'd sure like to keep you, but the old lady creature would never let me. That must be the apartment owner. Ribsy lay his nose on his paw and looked up at Larry, who returned Ribsy's gaze. You hungry? Larry asked. Ribsy thumped his tail on the sidewalk. He liked having a boy talk to him. Larry liked a dog to talk to. If you was a big cross dog, I bet old lady creature would stop yelling at me. She'd be scared to yell if I had a big dog following me around. Ribsy rolled over on his back and allowed Larry to rub his stomach for a while. You wait here, said Larry. No, that wouldn't work. You might run off while I was getting you something to eat. Can you be real quiet? Larry asked. Ribsy thumped his tail again. Come on, then. I'll get you some cornflakes or a hot dog or something, said Larry, and pulled a key out of his pocket. Ribsy followed him up the stairs, and Larry unlocked the front door. Inside, he tiptoed past the apartment, the door of the apartment occupied by the manager, the boss of the building, to an old-fashioned elevator. Ribsy was ready to enjoy this new game with the boy was playing. Larry opened the glass door and folded back the metal gate, and Ribsy followed him into what appeared to be a small square room without any windows. Larry closed the gate of the door and pushed the button on the wall. There was a whirling noise, and suddenly Ribsy felt like he had never felt before. He felt as if he was going up while his stomach stayed down. He did not like the feeling one bit. He did not like this strange little room. He wanted out. He began to bark. Shh! Larry seemed upset about something because he scowled and grabbed at Ribsy. Shh! She'll hear you. The manager had already heard. A door on the first floor flew open, and the woman's cross voice called up, Harry Biggerstaff, you get that dog out of this building at once. It was the kind of voice that could make a dog slink away feeling guilty. By the time the little room had stopped at the second floor, Larry slid back the gate and opened the glass door. Before he stepped out, he whispered, "You stay right here. I'll come back and get you in a minute." Then he left the frightened dog and shut the little room. Ribsy did not know what to do. He did not want to stay in the little room all alone, but there was no way he could get out. He was even afraid to bark, so he made a little anxious noise. Suddenly he felt himself beginning to rise again, while his stomach seemed to stay behind. He barked, "Woo!" for Larry to come and to get him out of this place. But all he heard was the whirling machine and the thump of Larry's sneakers running downstairs. As the elevator stopped on the third floor and his stomach caught up with him, Ribsy heard Larry's frightened voice coming up the elevator shaft from the first floor. "Dog? What dog?" he was saying. "I don't have any dog." "Don't you lie to me," said the manager. "I know there's a dog in this building." "It isn't my dog," said Larry. Upstairs, a woman opened a door and pushed back the gate. "Hello," said the woman to Ribsy, as if she met dogs in elevators every day. "How did you manage to push the button?" This time, Ribsy was taking no chance of being left in this frightening room that made him lose his stomach. He dashed past the woman and into the third floor hall, while the door of the elevator closed behind him. Now he did not know what to do. He was in a long hall with a strip of worn carpet down the center and the doors on either side. At one side of the hall was a staircase, and at the other end was a window to a fire escape sign over it. Nothing looked familiar to Ribsy, who had never been in an apartment house before. Larry's voice came up the stairwell. "But I don't have a dog." Ribsy was the only thing he could think of. He started down the stairs toward Larry's voice. "Young man," said Mrs. Creature, "you took a dog into the elevator. You can't fool me." Ribsy hesitated. He did not like the sound of this woman's voice. It reminded him of too many voices that yelled at him. "You get off my lawn," somebody would say to him thousands of times. Here's a picture of him, of Ribsy in the hallway. I like the pencil sketches, do you? "You get off my lawn," somebody would yell to him. Sometimes voices like this were accompanied by a rock or clod of dirt. Ribsy heard the elevator door open down on the first floor, and the manager say in quite a different voice, "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Berg. I was looking for a dog in the elevator." "There's no dog in the elevator," said Mrs. Berg, who was a friend of Larry's and who understood the situation. "I've come to pay my rent." "Certainly," said the manager. "Just step into my apartment while I write you a receipt." Ribsy stood listening at the steps, but all he heard was the elevator door close and the machinery whirl. As the elevator rose, Ribsy started cautiously down the steps. He did not know what to expect in this strange building where rooms went up in the air. The second floor looked exactly like the third, which Ribsy had just left. The same strip of carpet, the same doors on either side, the same windows with a sign over it at the end of the hall. Ribsy felt confused. He was even more confused when he heard a whisper. "Psst!" It was Larry, who was supposed to be down below, but who was now up above. While Ribsy had walked down to the second floor, Larry had ridden up to the third. "Woof!" Ribsy answered, who wanted to get out of this place. "Shh!" Larry's worried face appeared in the stairwell above Ribsy. He came tiptoeing down the steps. "I've got to get out of here," he whispered. "Come on." He started to lead Ribsy down the steps when the door to the manager's apartment opened on the first floor. "Thank you, Mrs. Berg," the manager was saying. "We can't go down that way," whispered Larry. "Come on this way." Ribsy obeyed, because he did not know where to go himself, and because he wanted to stay away from that woman with the angry voice. Larry led him down the hall and toward the back stairs, which were near the window with the sign above it. He was about to start down with Ribsy when he heard someone coming up. I don't know who it is, but I'm not taking any chances, Larry muttered, looking around wildly. He saw the window at the end of the hall and opened it. Ribsy found himself being picked up and thrust through the window and dropped onto the fire escape. The fire escape is like stairs on the outside of the building that if you're in an apartment, you can climb down if your path inside is blocked. The window was closed behind him and the curtain pulled. Ribsy's feet slid through the metal bars of the fire escape and stuck down in empty spaces. In an elevator was a strange place. A fire escape was much, much worse. Ribsy felt as if he should be falling, but instead he hung in midair. Inside he heard the manager's angry voice, which made him feel as if he had done something he should not. But he could not understand what it was. Silently, he struggled to get all 4 feet onto the metal bars of the fire escape. Ribsy soon discovered that a fire escape was not only frightening, it was uncomfortable. He had to move his feet carefully on the cold metal, or they would slip through. It made him uneasy to see the ground so far below. There was an opening in the fire escape big enough to jump through, but the ground was way too far below. So Ribsy's not on something flat. He's kind of like on a bunch of sticks, and he can see through the sticks. Since Ribsy could not get down, he did the next best thing. He went up because he was an optimistic dog. That means he looks for the best. He hoped things might get better if he went up. He climbed up cautiously, 1 step on the steep, slanted ladder at a time. Unfortunately, when he reached the next level of the fire escape, things got worse. The good solid ground was farther away. Ribsy peered into the window, but the 3rd floor was empty. The 3rd floor hallway was empty. With his tail drooping, Ribsy looked around. The view was better, but there was nothing a dog would be glad to see, only some old fenders and wrecked cars behind a body and fender shop below. He could look out over the roof of the shop and see cars and buses on the busy street on the other side of the block. He tried whimpering at the window, but no one came. He gave an experimental bark, woof! But there was so much banging at the body and fender shop because they were working that no one heard him. Bewildered and frightened, Ribsy lay down on the fire escape as best he could. The cold metal bars pressed into his body and the breeze blew under him as well. Nothing was comfortable. Nothing was familiar. He felt more lost than he ever had before. There was nothing to do but lie on the fire escape, watching the traffic and listening to the banging of the body and fender shop, and wait for things to get better. A half an hour went by, and then an hour. Larry did not come back, and the building was silent because the apartment overlooking the body and fender shop were rented by people who were out all day and did not have to listen to the noise. Ribsy grew cold and stiff. His body hurt from the iron bars that pressed into him. Things were not getting any better. Ribsy would have to do something. Ribsy got up and managed to shake himself without having his feet slip through the bars of the fire escape. Cautiously, he put one forepaw, front foot, and then the other on the window ledge once more and whimpered at the empty hall. The doors remained closed. No rescuers appeared. Ribsy became impatient. He barked, "Roof!" Still, no one came to rescue him. No one cared about a dog on a fire escape. He was forgotten. Ribsy turned around carefully and barked through the railing toward the traffic on the next street. The only answer he got was a banging in the body and fender shop below. Ribsy walked gingerly around the fire escape to make sure he had not missed a way out. There were only the ladder-like steps, and while he had not minded climbing up, they were much too steep to go down. Ribsy became frantic. He felt as if the whole world had gone off and left him. He barked, woof, and barked and barked. There must be somebody, someplace who would come and get him off this thing. And there was somebody. Somebody way down on the next street. "Ribsy!" It was Henry Huggins' voice coming from the new station wagon, which was moving along with the rest of traffic. "Ribsy!" Henry had his head out of the window and was pointing up at the fire escape. At the sound of his voice, Ribsy went wild. He barked until he was hoarse. In his excitement, his hind feet slipped through the fire escape. Terrified lest he fall through, he scrambled frantically to regain his footing on the metal bars. When his feet were planted safely once more, there was no sign of Henry anyplace. This terrified Ribsy even more. Henry had gone off and left him again. He barked so hoarsely and so wildly that even the Body and Fender men heard him. One of them came to the back door of the shop and looked up at the dog on the fire escape. "Well, I'll be doggone," he said, pushing the greasy cap on his head. "How did you get up there?" Ribsy whimpered anxiously. He felt better just having somebody speak to him. "Hey, Bert," said the body and fender worker man, called to someone in a shop. "There's a dog on the fire escape." "No kidding." Bert appeared and looked up. "Well, what do you know? There is a dog on the fire escape. How do you suppose he got there?" Ribsy tried to tell the men that he had to get down, that he had to run down the street and find Henry Huggins before he got too far away. He could never find him again. "What do you think we should do?" asked the body and fender workermen. Bert suggested, "Probably some kid put him up there. Most likely it was Larry. He'll probably get himself down." "Yeah, I guess you're right." The two men knew Larry, who often came into the shop to admire the wrecked cars. Suddenly, Ribsy saw Henry Huggins appear from around the side of the building. "Ribsy!" the boy shouted. "I found you!" This time, Ribsy barked for joy at the sight of the boy below. "Funny place to lose a dog," remarked the body and fender man. "I didn't lose him," explained Henry, his eyes on his dog. "I lost him for a month ago at the shopping center." "Then what's he doing up there?" the man asked. "Searched me," said Henry. "All that really matters is that he had found his dog at last. All I know is that I was talking to him on the telephone and he started running and nobody saw him after that." The two men looked at each other and shook their head and turned back to the body shop. "Talking to a dog on the telephone?" One of them said something that sounded like, "Poor kid, too much TV." The other said, "Yeah, my boy watches those talking animal programs too. He's too smart to believe them." Next, Ribsy saw Henry's mother and father come around the corner of the apartment house. "I finally found a parking space," remarked Mr. Huggins, and looked up at Ribsy. "Hello there, fella," said Dad. Ribsy made eager, anxious noises. Sure his family would not go off and leave him here. "See, Dad, I told you if we drove around in this neighborhood, we'd sure to find him. I told you he couldn't be too far from Joe's house." "You were right, Henry," said his mother. "And now we don't have to argue with that boy Joe about who owns him. How on earth do you suppose he got out there?" Ribsy whimpered again to remind Henry that he would like to get off this thing. "What worries me is how we are going to get him down," said Henry. By this time, Larry Biggerstaff arrived. He had been sitting on the front steps worrying about how he was going to get rid of a dog when he noticed three people hurry down to the side of the apartment and had overheard the words dog and fire escape. Here's a picture. Ooh, that gives us a perspective, huh? There's the people. I can't figure out how to show you. There's the people at the bottom, and there's Ribsy. His apartment building, and had overheard the words dog and fire escape. "That's easy," Mr. Huggins was saying. "I'll just go ring the bell and tell the manager we want our dog back." "Please don't do that," begged Henry, bursting into the conversation. "The dog isn't supposed to be there, and I'll catch it if the manager finds out about him. She might even evict me and my mother, like she always says she's going to." Ribsy barked to remind the people below that he was still up there. "Shh," hissed Henry. "I don't get it. What's he doing up there?" "Well, I was playing out front with this old tennis ball I have." From the way Larry spoke of the tennis ball, it made it easy to tell he did not think much of it. This dog came along and wanted to chase it, and well, I got to thinking that he might be hungry, so I started to take him inside, and the manager started chasing me, and I shoved him out on the fire escape to hide him. And while I've been sitting here on the front of the steps trying to figure out how I was going to get rid of him without the manager seeing me. I see, said Mr. Huggins. Well, you just get him down, said Henry, fast. Now, Henry, said his mother. I didn't put him out there on the third floor, said Larry, as if that helped situations. I put him out on the second, and he climbed up to the third. Ribsy was so eager to get down, he put his paws on the ladder-like steps. He could not do it. They were too steep, and he was too afraid. We seem to have a problem, said Mr. Huggins, looking up at the dog on the fire escape. Maybe you could boost me up onto that ladder that sticks down from the bottom part, and then I could climb up and carry him down, offered Larry, who was glad someone had arrived to help him with this problem. Oh, no, said Mrs. Huggins hastily. We couldn't let you climb down those steep steps with a dog. You might slip. Ribsy could not be patient any longer. He put his paws on the top steps again. Maybe we could call the fire department and they could bring the net and he could jump, suggested Henry. Don't do that. Please don't do that, Henry objected strenuously. The manager really gets excited when she sees the fire engine in front of the building. Ribsy was beginning to think the people below had forgotten all about him. He put a second paw on the second step. He wanted so much to get down. He wanted to feel Henry pet him again and to lick his face. Even though he was afraid, he was going to try. This is ridiculous, said Mr. Huggins. I'll just go to the back door and go up the back stairs and bring him through the window. And have someone mistake you for a burglar? Asked Mrs. Huggins. Oh, no. You go, Henry said to Larry. You got him up there? You get him down. Larry looked frightened. The manager might catch me. Then I'll go, said Henry. Ribsy reached for the second step and at the same time brought his hind feet to the top step. No, you won't, said Henry's mother. You can't go roaming around in a strange building. We can't just leave him there, Henry began. Ribsy had started down the steep steps. It was too late to turn back now, even if he wanted to, and he did not want to. He found himself coming down the steps faster than he expected. The metal was slippery to his paws. Halfway down, he slipped and tumbled and yelped to the bottom. And there he was. He was with his feet dangling in space again. Hey, look! Henry pointed unnecessarily. Everyone was looking at Ribsy. He got down by himself. That proves he wants to come to us. Ribsy picked himself up and scrambled around, trying to find places to set his feet. Did you hurt yourself, boy? Ribsy, Henry said. Ribsy managed to set his feet on the slats of the fire escape. Woof, he said, and wagged his tail to show that he was still all right. Smart dog, Ribsy, said Henry. Now how do you get him down from there? The two men from the body and fender shop came out once more to see what all the commotion was about. I heard that dog talks on the telephone, remarked Bert. He did once, said Mr. Huggins absent-mindedly. He was wondering how they were going to get Ribsy down to the ground. The two men exchanged glances. There's a ladder in the shop that should reach almost to the bottom of the fire escape, one of them said. I'll get it. He returned in a moment with a painted, splattered step ladder, which he set under the fire escape. It almost reached the metal ladder that extended down from the fire escape. I'll go, Dad, Henry said, eager to get his hands on his dog again. You'd better let me go, said his father, mounting the stepladder. With help so near, Henry barked joyfully. Shh, hissed Larry. Mr. Huggins climbed the stepladder and then a short ladder that was part of the fire escape. He crawled through the opening in the lower level of the fire escape and picked up Ribsy. Hold still, boy, he said, as Ribsy gratefully tried to lick his face. You'll fall, worried Mrs. Huggins. You can't possibly climb down the fire escape ladder and a step ladder with a dog. Don't drop him, begged Henry. I'm afraid that's what I'll have to do, said Mr. Huggins. Go ahead, said one of the body and fender men. We'll catch him. Ribsy felt himself being lifted over the rail of the fire escape, and then he experienced a terrible moment of panic as he fell through the air. Suddenly, everything was all right. 4 strong hands caught him. Ribsy wiggled out of the grasp of the body and fender men and sprang into Henry's arms, where he licked Henry's face with joy. Ribsy! Ribsy! Ribsy, old boy! He put his dog down at last, and Ribsy was so happy he wagged all over. Henry sank to his knees and hugged his dog. Whew, that's a relief, said Larry. Mr. Huggins reached into his pocket and brought out a wallet. I think part of the reward money should be yours, he said to Larry. What for? Larry looked suspicious at Henry's father, as if he thought he might be joking. I didn't do anything. You put him up there where we could see him, he said. He held out 3 $1 bills. If you hadn't put him on the fire escape, we couldn't have driven all around all day without seeing him. Larry looked doubtful at the bills. Sure, said Henry. You put him up there in plain sight. Larry took the 3 bills. Thanks. I can buy a good ball with this, he grinned at Mr. Huggins and at Henry. Then he patted Ribsy. Ribsy was so happy that he wriggled all over for Larry, too. And now I think we better go home before Larry's manager catches us, said Mr. Huggins, as the men took down the ladder and carried it into the body and fender shop. I wonder if that dog knows how to dial the telephone, too, remarked Bert. If he does, he ought to be on TV, answered the other man. Henry, his parents, and Larry walked along the side of the apartment house, with Ribsy bounding along beside them. In front of the building, they ran into Mrs. Creature, who was sweeping the front steps. I knew you had a dog, Larry Biggerstaff, she said triumphantly. Wait till I talk to your mother about this. There must be some mistake, said Mr. Huggins politely. This is our dog. He never belonged to Larry. But, said Mrs. Screech. No, said Mr. Huggins firmly. This dog is ours, and has been for several years. We just misplaced him for a while. There they are. Looks like they're back in the car, Henry and Ribsy. One more page. I think. Yes. Mrs. Screech did not know what to say, so she went back to sweeping the steps. Henry opened the door of the station wagon, which still smelled like a new car. Hop in, he said to Ribsy. Ribsy accepted the invitation. He jumped in and settled himself on the seat. This time he knew he was welcome. Henry climbed in beside him. He picked up the leather collar, which was lying on the seat, and fastened it around Ribsy's neck. Ribsy's tail thumped his tail on the upholstery on the seat. Mrs. Huggins smiled at Ribsy and did not say a word. Ribsy could ride in the new station wagon all he wanted. Well, that's the end of Ribsy. If you enjoyed this book, look for more books by Beverly Cleary. They're really good. I hope you enjoyed it. Give me an email if you did. Be interesting to find out if you listened to me all the way through. Have a great day. Talk to ya.